So the next song moves on from the block about death and leads into the last two songs, which are kind of conclude the two ongoing major themes, the two voices. And it transitions from, we talked about how Edward Bends is kind of this moment where where the mentality starts to shift. And then I See Everything is where it finally does, where at the end of the song, he's acknowledging that he is partly responsible for letting things continue, letting that loss that the first song that A Departure introduces affect him for as long as it has. And the next song, the fourth Archer song, A Broken Jar, is kind of him finally acknowledging that in a manner that's, I don't think, any less defeating than the previous three of those songs and most of the annotations. But I think it's significant in that it shows the shift finally happening, where he again addresses the loss, where he says, it's the image in the song about a broken jar, which comes from a book by John Berger called The Shape of a Pocket. And he talks about how you knock a jar over, and this thing that meant a lot to you, that had a significance, and you knock it over and it breaks, and you try to put it back together the way that it once was. But even after you've done so, the cracks are still apparent, and in a way that achieves a different level of significance. So for me, it was attaching that image to that loss, where it was like in the outset of the record, or whatever inspired him to write these stories, was this loss, was this broken thing, and then it's been the process of putting it back together to try to restore that one thing and not look for other options that has derailed him for so long. So the biggest point of that song, of A Broken Jar, is him deciding that maybe it's time to stop trying to recreate that one thing and to discard it and to move on and to search for something elsewhere and to stop with the self-loathing, I guess. But like I said, it still maintains that kind of descent into instability. And he still kind of speaks of himself in a negative light. And the other thing is, throughout the record, I think the two voices start to blend more and more into one. And part of that is to show that collapse in a way. And in that song, that's addressed. It's just a question of whether or not he's been separating the two voices, whether or not there's ever been a distinction between the narrative voice and the monologue. The first one is very, very much like it's a one long question in some ways. And what I wanted it to be initially was kind of the summation and conclusion for all of the stories. So All Our Bruised Bodies and The Whole Heart Shrinks is, in a way, just a very general discussion about all of those stories and about their commonality and how they apply to everyone. In the last line, the whole, everyone in the world comes at some point to suffering, is really, I think, the point of it, that the thing that links everyone to those songs is that no one's exempt, that everyone suffers through something, and that's universal. So it's kind of like this, it starts with, so tell me what your story is. And I wanted it to be, applicable to everyone, to kind of an invitation to apply all these concepts and themes to the life of the person listening to it, or the lives of the people around them, to everyone, I guess. So that's kind of All Our Bruised Bodies in a nutshell. Yeah, so at the end of I See Everything, when he makes this realization that he's, after discussing those three songs and after discussing what those people have been through, and then realizing that it's not, in realizing that there are people that have suffered so much worse than him, he comes to recognize that the idea of suffering is universal, and it's something that applies to everyone in varying degrees, and it's something that it ties us all together. So All Our Bruised Bodies is really him taking that focus off of himself exclusively and applying it to everybody everywhere. And, there's no rule. Everybody comes to something. Like, everybody has their personal demons and their struggles, and something that makes them question their own purpose, and something that makes them question their ability to cope. And for him, it's one thing. But, and it kind of also shows him coming to understand that, the dwelling on it, the self-loathing is pointless, but it's also not wrong for him to have a hard time coming to terms with his own personal struggle. Just because your thing doesn't seem as significant as someone else's doesn't mean it's insignificant. Yeah, so it's kind of like him forgiving himself in a way for the way that he's dwelled on that.